Hello, what's up, guys? This is the Ibrahim and Kai podcast, episode 3, I think. And in the last episode, we talked about Ibrahim's journey into the street photography. And so for this episode, we're going to start talking about my experience starting doing street photography. Okay? So last time Ibrahim said that he started doing it, but you started first doing product photography, like tech photography, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, you started to get more into street photography, but with this perspective that you had when you were doing product photography. So you kind of looking for layout, like cool design and all of that. That was your perspective when you were doing street photography.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
As far as I remember, the first time I was doing like travel photography. Like I was traveling with my wife. We were in Vietnam, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was just like, we went to a city in Vietnam. I've never been there, so I was just taking pictures. But I just had my first semester of photography 101, so I thought that I should have my photos should look a bit better than just the tourist photos. So I was trying to looking for composition when I was taking it, and the more I take it, the more I just start to enjoy taking street photography, but I didn't know back then. So yeah, what was it?
It all started with your trip to Vietnam with your wife. Right?
Yeah.
And that's when you're like, did you have a camera back then, or?
I was using a very bad Nikon 5000, I guess. I didn't know what it's called, and that one was pretty bad in low light. But then it's very interesting because that camera is so bad in low light, but it turned out that I had this crazy love with low light photography, and I was using that very bad camera, taking like, I think the maximum ISO is like 500 or something. Like after 500, after 500 is just like disgusting. So I was using that one, taking street photography, and unlike other photographer who usually hate their first set of photos, I actually still love the photos that I took. Like the first time me doing street photography, I still go back from time to time and looking at those photos. And the interesting about those photos is that the way that the things that I like about street photography, like, how can I explain this? Like back then, the things that I find interesting is still interesting to me now. Like it didn't change.
Oh, so your interests and your likings of what to shoot and what the subject matter is has entirely changed since then.
Yeah.
You had the same interest. That's very interesting, and I could see that through your Instagram when I scroll through it. You kind of had the same style, but it's more of like it has evolved. You're very much in the scene, and you're taking photos of shops, people passing by, and things that are happening at night. And I feel like actually your style was a bit cleaner back then. Now you're including more subjects and more. You have more elements in your compositions now, and I think you have evolved in what you're doing, even though your interests have remained the same, but your kind of style have evolved, and since that it has gotten better to me, at least, because your photos feel more complicated, more alive than they used to back then.
Actually, the first photos, like the first set of photos I took in Vietnam were also like people riding bikes. If you look at my photos, you know that I really like people riding bikes, motorbikes, and sometimes portraits. And the first one that I ever took is exactly those elements, and I still took it now. But one of the things that I think really affected my style was the culture, because I'm here in Taiwan right now, and in Taiwanese culture, it's just like motorbikes everywhere, people riding bikes. It's just like at night you see these neon signs, and it's pretty bright actually. Even at night you see all of these shops still open, because we have a lot of 24/7 shops in Asia. You rarely see any shops that are closed at night.
So the city remains alive at night. Like it's still people are walking, shops are open.
It's very beautiful at night. Like even after, and the thing is, because I'm so busy at work during the day, I don't actually really have a lot of time taking street photographies. So that's why I always go out at night. That's why most of my photos are at night also, because of that. Yeah.
It's more of the time constraint that you have, like, so you kind of fit photography into your life as well.
It kind of
yeah, that's really interesting. And I love photography at night because you're kind of using the lights of the shops to guide your compositions, if that makes sense. So you're looking for interesting lighting, the colors of like the little light bulb in the shop, and the it's shining on the person who's selling fish, or it has a certain vibe to it. It has a feeling that you don't get in the morning, where everything is so bright and everything, you can see everything clearly. But at night it's more of a you have a kind of the nature of the lights and of the shops, and the way things are, they guide your eye and makes things much more interesting.
The thing is,
it's almost like a film set for
we first start learning photography, and we were taking picture in the studio. The teacher, how they taught us is like, you start with one light. So you have your subject, your model, whatever, sitting there. You start with one light and you start to shape the character, right? But with street photography, is like you look for, it's kind of the same thing, but you use the existing light to try to shape your framing.
Exactly. Yeah, I was gonna say that.
That's why it's 100%. So fun, and because there's light everywhere, and there's different colors, different intensity, and it's like you can use light from everywhere. I took portraits with the light from an ATM machine. I use lights from a bus stop, and it's just very challenging. Every time the results is just so different. That's why I enjoy taking street photography. I believe you took a lot of night photography as well later on.
Yeah, I've done a couple in the past, and we used to go out at night, and I love rainy days at night.
Oh yeah, rainy days the best.
You don't have, like, you're not just using the lights of the shops and the streets, but you're also using the reflected light. So it's more like it makes the city look so much brighter, and you're using the reflected light on the water, on the water that's on the street, and it makes it so much more interesting. It makes the photo much more contrasty, and people walking with umbrellas, like I don't know why, but umbrellas look really cool.
In photos. I love it.
So yeah, man, it's amazing. So I have a question for you, Kai, actually. And it's a bit of a different so it's a bit of a different topic, but we're still on the same topic here, right? So I always think about it, right? Like when we look at street photographers from the past, who like used to take photos of, like, for instance, New York in the 1960s and 1940s, and some parts in Europe and Asia. And now when we look at these photos, they look much more interesting than like we think of them as really interesting photos, because these photographers have documented the journey back then and of how the situation used to be. Right. And now when I think about street photography in this day and age, it's almost like I think of it as what's going to happen in the future. Like, are we going to look back at this time in the future and be like, okay, like people back then, like we used to have an interesting life back then, in the same way that we are looking back at photos from these early street photographers and think of their photos are interesting. So it's more of this idea of documenting the journey. Or do you think that has happened once and it's probably not going to happen because of the age of social media and because of the replication of images that we have now? So what do you think about this?
That's so interesting, because I actually looked back into the history of street photography, and like, because I saw some debate on the internet of what exactly is street photography, and when you look back into the history of street photography, back then they didn't really call it street photography. As you said, it's more like people rarely go out on the street and just start taking random photos, because first of all, it's expensive. Second of all, like, what are you doing with that? Like, you kind of just look like a weirdo. So there are a lot of even earlier than the 1960s, you see even like some people taking street photography when photography is even invented. Some people took pictures back then, but those are more like documentation. And nowadays, actually, I was going to talk about something related to this. It's like, do you call this photojournalism or street photography? Because when you look at
that's an interesting question.
Photojournalism, you cannot really alter the content of the photos because you're trying to portray the truth, right? And in street photography, a lot of these very cool hippie street photographers nowadays, they edit a lot, right? Not that it's bad, but they look at it in a more aesthetic way. So they don't really see it as photojournalism. They see it as like a artwork, you know. So if someone is crossing the street and maybe a baby accidentally entered the frame, they would Photoshop it out, right? So it's kind of not like a documentation anymore. It's not a photojournalism. It's just a very cool photo that you took
of an event.
Yeah, kind of. It's like it's partially real and it's partially edited. So as you said, I feel like we are documenting what's happening right now, but we kind of altered the reality in a way also. So when I don't think it's going to be the same as how we see before. I think 20 years down the road, when people look at the photos that we took today, they're going to start questioning like how much of this is real and how much of this is fake. Because like you have all these filters nowadays, right? You know, you can change a lot of things with photos.
Yeah.
Or barely any photos that you see on the internet nowadays is not edited. So I don't think it's going to be the same. But it's such an interesting topic that you brought up. I haven't thought of it. Very interesting.
Yeah. I think so. I think also like it depends on how you want to look at it, right? So maybe in terms of like specific details, it's not that much of a documentation, but rather producing aesthetically pleasing photos of this day and age. But perhaps, I don't know, like if the future if in the future people like if the people have evolved so much that what we are doing today is way different than they were doing, then perhaps looking at today's street photography would give them an idea of how we are living, right? Because maybe you can manipulate the photo and you can change aspects of the photo, but perhaps the environment and the overall vibe and atmosphere of the photo remains the same. And so it kind of tells a story to a certain extent, even if it was manipulated on how we are living nowadays. But I think, the line between photojournalism as well and street photography is a bit, it's a little bit vague, if that makes sense, because we don't know. But perhaps in photojournalism, it's more of a documenting the journey. There's more of a fine line that, okay, I'm not going to manipulate the photo. I'm just going to shoot what's there.
Be street photography. Is, right?
Yes. In street photography, you have more flexibility of changing the photo and taking some elements out, adding some others, and perhaps the goal is aesthetic in a sense. It's an interesting.
I think what you said earlier is very true. Also, like even though we edited the photos, it's still like a trace of culture, like of what culture we have nowadays. Like, why would you edit the photo this way, right? You see some people, let's say they try to make their skin look very good in a photo, right? So people 20 years later, or even half a century later, they look back and say, oh, you know, people back then, they really care about their skin. That's why they try to make their skin look good. So it still has like some hint of what kind of culture we're living in this era. So whatever edit you see in it, it's still kind of like a message, right? So it does make sense.
Yes. Yeah, it does something about us, I guess, in a way, right?
Exactly.
It does something about the way we think, at least. If it doesn't say much about the way things are, perhaps.
Actually, there's a very interesting thing. You know, the photographer, Steve Mccurry. He's like one of the biggest.
Not really.
People call him a photojournalist, and actually he was one of like the first. He's the biggest. He did for like National Geographic, and his photo went on like Times Magazine cover and stuff. And he was taking pictures for like wars, and he went to like a lot of African country or some Middle East country, and he took a lot of photos. And back then he was doing photojournalism, but later years later in his career, he started to manipulate his photos. You know, he started looking into like the more aesthetic side of photos, and in his photos, sometimes you see a lot of kids, you know, they're playing
Mm-hmm.
football, let's say, and he
Mm-hmm.
just removed one kid from the photo. And later
Oh,
on, he got
okay.
called out that his photos are faked. And he said that he's not a photojournalist anymore. He's just a visual storyteller. So
Mm-hmm.
he went from like photojournalist to visual storyteller.
A
Like,
storyteller.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when he edited the photos, he didn't change the reality somehow. Like, if a kids look dirty, the kids stay dirty. He didn't make the kid
Mm-hmm.
look cleaner. He just removed some people's arm or like a car from the photo just so the composition looked good. But he didn't
Mm-hmm.
like change the truth of what's happening. Maybe like he did edit it, but people, I don't think people would think differently if they would have seen the original photo. You get what I mean?
Yeah. 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 So the event is still there, but he had just changed the details that don't actually change the overall image
He make it look
of
more
what's going on.
aesthetic. That's the thing.
Right. Right.
Yeah, but he
Mm-hmm.
still got called out, and then he didn't apologize, I think, but that was a very big thing back then when it happened.
Yeah, I think I personally believe that you can do whatever you want as long as you don't like lie about it, if that makes sense. Like if you don't if you tell people, okay, like I manipulate images, this is what I do, right? I've taken the child out of the image, right? If you're honest about
Yeah, just being
what you
transparent.
do, yes, exactly, just be transparent. Exactly, the right word is transparency here. And if you're just telling people what you're actually doing, then there's no problem with that. I don't think there's a problem. So people know what to expect from you, right? But if you tell people you're a photojournalist and then you're not necessarily capturing the truth of the moment, then that's a bit of a problem there, because people expect you to people expect your work to be a certain way while
Yeah.
it is certainly not. Yeah.
I even saw like there was this photo competition. I think it's from a very big company. It was from, I'm not gonna mention what name, but it was from a camera company, and they made this competition, and the winner, he took like a
Mm-hmm.
picture from like a small tunnel, like
Okay.
you know those kids slide in the park, and it's like a little
Yeah.
tunnel for kids to slide into, and then
Yeah. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
tip
Yeah.
of the tunnel was towards the sky, and then so the photographer, he was inside the tunnel, and he took from from inside the tunnel towards the outside, and there was like a plane flying
Mm-hmm.
by, and that was like the winner photo, right? But later on they found out
Okay.
that it was edited.
The plane was added.
Yeah, the plane was edited, but it was
Oh.
such a big competition. And the thing is, the
Whoa.
editing was so bad because if you just add contrast in the photo, you'll see the lines of the
Yeah.
cutout.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it just became
Oh,
such a
okay.
huge like scandal. And then now they're very, very careful about these edited photos. I think even
Yeah.
Photoshop, they have a new feature that you can check if this photo was edited or not. I don't know if you heard of it.
Okay. I haven't.
Like
I haven't heard
Photoshop
of
was
it.
the one who created like photo editing, but now they created an photo editing app just to make sure that a photo is not edited. Like they use that now
Okay.
for competitions.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah.
By the way, I'm actually curious, like how do you edit your photos when you first take a photo? Like, what do you look into? Do you first look for contrast? Do you look for exposure or colors? Do you have a process, or every time it's different?
Yeah. So when it comes to editing my photos, it depends, right? So do you mean like photos coming out of the camera? So I came back from a shoot and I have a collection of photos that I have taken,
Yeah.
and now I need to edit them? Or do you mean like I have a certain photo in mind, I need to edit it? What kind of?
I'm talking about like after you went out taking a lot of street photography and you come back home.
Okay.
You know, looking for those photos.
Okay. So when I come back from from a street photography, like when I come back from like when I'm out and I'm back, right, from taking photos. So first thing I do is that I plug my micro SD card, and then I check all the photos that I have taken. And while I'm in the street, I usually have in mind what kind of photos. Like while I'm taking photos, I usually have in mind what kind of photos work, right? So when I'm editing, I already know which photos work and which don't, but I usually look at like I usually check all the photos that I have and see what I have, and then I start editing the best photos first, right? And first of all, I look at the image, I see if it needs cropping or not, and then see how can I
so you look at the composition first.
Yeah, first thing is composition. What do I need to crop? How can I make this photo look better overall? And then I start manipulating the colors and working with contrast, exposure, highlights, all of that.
That's
yeah.
very interesting.
What about you, by the way?
I checked, like, obviously the composition has to be nice already, but I actually crop my image at the end. I always start by checking like because I take night photography, so the first thing I always check is the highlight and shadow contrast, because night photography, a lot of times the highlight and shadow contrast is too intense and you cannot really recover it in post-production. So I always check the highlight and contrast at first. By the way, a very interesting thing that I heard, I'm not sure if it's true, but in film, film photography, like real film, they're bad at shadows, but in digital camera, they're bad at highlights, like for recovery. So when I'm taking like film, I try to kind of overexpose the photos, but when I'm doing digital photography, I usually underexpose it because it's harder to recover the highlights.
Yes, I always say this, by the way. I always say it's in digital.
Yeah.
It's way easier to protect your shadows than to protect your highlights.
Yeah.
Because you can always, I feel like you can always recover your shadows to a certain extent. You'll get noise, but they're still there, right? But the highlights get clipped so easily.
Exactly.
Man. So you have to.
I think that that is true. I've seen it somewhere, like some people talking about it, but from my experience, I believe it's true. The highlights.
But that's also very interesting.
Yeah.
That's also very interesting. The way film works is that if it works the opposite way. So it's easier for you to recover your shadows than your highlights.
Why is it though? I have no idea. But that was like the main issue, because if in night photography, if you cannot recover the highlight, then there's practically no detail, especially when I'm taking photos of these big billboards and they have like ads on it. So but the thing is, the more you take, the more you will know that how bright it should be and it's still recoverable. You will get a sense of it, and that's always the first thing I check, and then I start look for colors and all of that. So
I think it's maybe because film is a bit contrasty, right? So maybe you get your shadows are more crushed in a way coming out of the image. But I feel like to a certain extent, raw, like with raw images, like it's crazy what you can do, like how much you can manipulate the image, how much you can edit your photo. It's insane, like actually insane.
Like raw photos kind of open up night photography, I would say, because if you look at photos, the night photos taken on film back in the days, it still look good, but it's grainy. But now with digital, you can take very, very clean night photography. Although I'm still more leaning towards like grainy night photography, I find it more pleasing visually to me. But I think being able to take very clean night photography is such an amazing thing.
But by the way, what's your approach into street photography in general? Like let's say you were out shooting, right? You have finished your night shooting and now you're coming back home. Like what's your approach? What do you do usually?
I'm kind of like you. When I took the photo, I would already, like after finishing the shoot, I already have a few photos in mind that I know it's gonna be.
You already have
fire.
in mind what you need.
A lot of times, honestly, if you really look into it, you'll find a lot of photos that you didn't really pay attention to it, but it looks so good after you edit it. Like a lot of my favorite photos is like I didn't even pay attention to it. I just took it. I didn't even took a second one, and I kind of have to crop it because, like, if you just look straight into the original photo, you wouldn't find it good also. But if you crop it and you find like a very good spot, it looks amazing. So I always like edit the most exciting photo. And the thing is, I can't stop thinking about those photos. Like, I'm just so excited going back to my laptop and edit those photos. And then after I finish editing those photos, I will look through all of the photos again and find some like interesting photos as well. So
I also have the same feeling. Like, for some reason, when we see something interesting, we take a photo of it, but we don't really know what's exactly aesthetically pleasing in that shot, right? So maybe when we come back to edit it, then we would look at it from another angle and see that, okay, maybe the lighting in this area of the shot makes the whole image look much more beautiful, and maybe that's what we need to.
But that's so fun, isn't it? That's so fun. I really love that process.
Totally. It's amazing, dude. That feeling when you come back from a night shoot and then you have all these photos collected, it's freaking amazing.
So good, man.
Okay. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening again to the Ibrahim and Kai podcast, and make sure to follow us on Instagram, Ibrahim and Kai podcast, and check out our other social media platforms under the same name, Ibrahim and Kai podcast. And thank you so much for listening, and see ya.
Thank you.
Bye.